that each game they made had several variations of itself, so you could play the game several different times in different ways, and that's what this game does right, particularly with these two. I just think this world is more static and boring as a whole. I still enjoy it, but it can't help but feel lesser than the previous two games. Humongous Entertainment.
Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time.
People of a certain age will remember Humongous Entertainment with fond reverence and a hint of nostalgia. They were the company that spearheaded accessible children's entertainment on the PC in the 90s, making creative point-and-click adventure games with engaging premises and wholesome plots, with gameplay simple enough that even the youngest children could pick them up and play them, and system requirements low enough that even the most meager of household PCs could run them, hitting the ultimate sweet spot of accessibility with younger middle-class families, and for many years they were the benchmark for children's entertainment on the PC. Until they weren't.
Generally speaking, whenever you ask a person of a certain age what they know Humongous Entertainment for, you'll get a different answer from person to person. However, Humongous Entertainment had four major tentpoles in this genre: Putt Putt, Spy Fox, Freddy Fish, and our topic today, Pajama Sam. I'm not gonna count Blue's Clues because that was licensed.
Now, while these games were sold in stores, I got them like I'd imagine many people got them, at the bottom of a cereal box, so I got what I got. I had Freddy Fish 3 and I think 1 when I was super young, however the Pajama Sam trilogy was what I was most familiar with.
So, slip into some comfy pajamas, grab your preferred hot beverage of choice, and allow me to help you forget for the next little while that the world is literally on fire.
We start out with the first game, Pajama Sam, No Need to Hide When It's Dark Outside. Before we really get into it, I need to address something. Why am I, a grown man, playing games that openly advertise themselves as for children 3 to 8? Well, aside from being a raging man-child and wanting to revisit one of the last nostalgia wells that are untapped for me, I'm also curious to see how well these games hold up to fresh adult eyes. I've heard it said before that the earmark of bad children's media is that it can only be enjoyed by kids. Pixar has made an entire studio out of the phrase fun for all ages. I remember I used to love the show Dave the Barbarian, and you know what? I still love it. In fact, I think it's better now than it used to be because I understand all the jokes that went over my head as a kid and can appreciate the Metallica cameo all the more.
Okay, Shrimpo, you're gonna tell us how come you're here, or we're gonna find out just how far you can stretch.
Yeah, far you can stretch.
Even my dad loved that show, and how many times must I bring up Sly Cooper as an example of this? If you're a parent who just wants to know if you should buy these games on Steam for your kid/kids, then yes, say no more, go ahead and buy them. Your kid/kids will love them. They're cheap and wholesome entertainment. For everyone else in a similar boat to me, keep watching. Though just in case there are kids watching, I'll try not to swear for once. I said try. One thing that stands out about Humongous Entertainment's catalog is that each series had an entirely different feel, even while having the same basic point-and-click adventure gameplay. Freddy Fish was like a slice-of-life adventure series under the ocean, Spy Fox had more of an espionage thing going, and Pajama Sam is more like everyday adventures in a small child's imagination. Each game takes the central theme of something a child might have to deal with while they're growing up, and expands that into a wacky adventure story. In this case, it's the idea of having a fear of the dark, so I guess Sam has a constant fear that something's always near. These games are essentially interactive cartoons with point-and-click adventure elements, so they're very dialogue-heavy.
Can't sleep with darkness hanging around in my closet? I'm gonna have to capture him. This is a job for Pajama Sam.
Sam is voiced by none other than Pamela Adlon from insert one of about 50 million roles here, including Night Court.
I want to watch my Night Court tape.
But if you're like me, you'll either remember her as the voice of Bobby Hill from King of the Hill or Spinelli from Recess, a show that I used to actually quite dislike. In fact, Sam's voice is basically just Spinelli's voice again.
Let's go back up the falls and come down again.
Oh, I have a better idea. Let's not.
So the plot here is that Sam promises his mother that he's going to turn off the lights for the first time, but the dark starts to get to him. With inspiration from his favorite superhero Pajama Man, he leaps into action to capture the physical embodiment of darkness in his lunchbox. It's a tradition that in every game you have to click around the room to find the equipment that you can't go without before setting off. In this case, it's his mask, lunchbox, and flashlight. With that, you set off into the subterranean world in Sam's closet. So we're going full Majora's Mask up in this. You know the rest. He promptly gets his flashlight, lunchbox, and mask stolen and has to find them before he can face darkness. Facing darkness. So aside from crossing over with Majora's Mask, we're bringing Kingdom Hearts into this now? How many levels deep are we going? Are we attempting to build a Wald Newton family tree out of Pajama Sam? Anyway, I said I've had more experience with the Pajama Sam trilogy than any other humongous entertainment franchise, and while that's true, this is actually my first time playing through this specific game other than the demo, so this is all brand new to me. And the first thing that sticks out to me is that this game is dark. Tonally as well as graphically. I'll admit that this game would have scared me if I was a super young kid, especially the bit where Sam is basically mugged by a group of trees.
Pajama Sam, eh? Well, alright then, Pajama Sam. You can go, but I've got my eye on you.
Yeah, if I had a fear of the dark as a kid, this would not help. As the game gets going, it's your typical point-and-click adventure game. Your goals are set out before you. You have to use your wits to recover your 3 items to face darkness. You have to solve environmental puzzles as well as inventory puzzles, explore, talk to characters, explore the world, all the typical hallmarks of graphic adventure games. One thing that separates the humongous entertainment catalog from other companies is that each game they made had several variations of itself, so you could play the game several different times in different ways. And this is no different. So I played 3 times and each time had a different path. This is instant replay value, just add water. In addition, Pajama Sam is very short, so you can get through each playthrough in an hour and a bit. As for the puzzles, they're mostly quite simple. You find an oil can, there's a rusty minecart that needs oil. There's a boat that insists he can't swim, throw a plank of wood into the water to show that wood floats. Some puzzles take some extra steps, like there's this one where you need to use a crank to elevate the minecart to get enough speed to make a jump, but first you need to get a matching gear from the grandfather clock in Darkness's mansion, but to do that you need to adjust the time on the grandfather clock to the correct time, but to do that you need to get the correct time from the room with the dancing furniture, but before that you need to hit the switch to turn the lights on in the mine, but before that, okay, I'll stop. With most of these puzzles, they're pretty straightforward, so even while it may feel like you're chipping away at a wall with an ice pick, it's less obtuse than something like Leisure Suit Larry. I only got stumped twice, and neither were my fault, though it's no less shameful. The first was with the chair. I knew I needed to use this chair to get to the top shelf, to get the blue potion, to make an invisibility potion, to enter the room with the dancing furniture without them noticing. That sentence was a roller coaster. But the chair wouldn't go to the shelf, even though he did in previous playthroughs. I thought, okay, there's something here I need to get. Nope, I just needed to keep clicking until the chair went over to the shelf, which he just refused to do for the longest time. Okay. The second is that I needed to find the grandfather clock. What grandfather clock? I went all around the house and couldn't for the life of me find one. Turns out there's a room I missed that had no indication of its existence. It was just off here in the corner. How was I supposed to know that was there? There's nothing obvious to indicate the hallway's there. Why not just use the perfectly good door right there in the same room? There's also a bit where you need to swing on the chandelier to get some ores, but the indication of when you're supposed to swing and how you're supposed to swing isn't said, so I just winged it until I got the ores. So that's balls, but otherwise all these puzzles make sense and can be figured out by anyone with any sort of deduction skills. Like, if you find a pickaxe, you know that it's used to collect the gold that the toll bridge needs before he'll let you pass, or the bookshelf that leads you to a secret passage, and the hint to the passage is right in the same room. I don't think they really understand the word secret. Thankfully, this game only spawns the items that you need, and the items that you need are very prominent and distinguished from the background, so you always know exactly what can and can't be interacted with, and the function of each item always makes some level of sense, even through this game's filter. Especially through this game's filter, actually. And even if you don't know what an item is for, the fact that you can even pick it up means that you know it can be used somehow. Though the cursor does light up at more than the basic items, because another hallmark of the humongous entertainment catalog is that almost every item in the background is interactable, so if you click on them, some random animation will play out and they're never not creative.
Back in my day, we had Pong.
It really makes this game feel active and lively, but I'm also not so tone deaf that I don't understand why this was put in. Once again, the age demographic is very young for this game, so there needs to be a lot to stimulate the old kiddywinks to please their short attention span. I imagine some 3-year-old pressing the cursor at the baseball and the bat together to hit the ball, and the kid clapping like a circus seal.
Way to remind me I'm a grown-ass man reviewing an actual factual kids game. Where did I go wrong in life?
But it's a great touch nonetheless that adds a layer of liveliness and energy to these worlds. That said, there are a few ugly moles to the game design, and these are moles that never seem to go away. Collectibles and half-baked minigames. The collectibles in this game are socks. Throughout the game you'll see socks scattered all over the place, and you have to collect 8 pairs of matching socks before washing them. What do you get for getting all the socks?
You get nothing!
So it's as thrilling as it sounds. Then there are these two main minigames. First of all is Cheese and Crackers, which is just 3, 4, and 5-way tic-tac-toe with cheese and crackers instead of X's and O's. You get nothing for winning, and in certain run-throughs you don't even need to go into this area. So that's dull. Then there's Nuggets, another optional minigame that you have to go out of your way to find, and it's just Snake running at maybe 2 seconds per frame. So it's as thrilling as it sounds, and it sounds like this. So the minigames are a bust, and trust me, that won't ever change as we go through this series, but at least the adventure game aspects are fun. Of course, if this game were just an adventure game for kiddies, then it wouldn't even be worth talking about, but the story and characters are what really sells this game, and indeed the trilogy. These games are just dripping with personality and fun characters. For a start, there's Otto, the wooden boat who sounds like Nolan North's engine.
I had this friend and he told me this story about his dentist brother who, he was made of wood and he got in the water and he sank.
We make a deal with this filthy rodent and Pine Nut's face, and they help us save the master.
He's a paranoid boat who's convinced he'll sink if he gets into the water. Then there's King, a minecart who has the personality of a stereotypical 19th century prospector.
I'm king of the tracks again, thanks to you, kid. Hey, what'd you say your name was?
Then there's Carrot, a talking carrot who leads a liberation effort to save his people from a salad. Funnily, he has the least imaginative name in the series, and yet he's one of the few reoccurring characters in the series. Regardless, every single moment of this game is filled with personality right down to the background animations. You never know what each room is going to bring and what ideas the deranged minds of the developers want to indulge. Like when you liberate the race of carrots from the fridge, it turns into a musical out of nowhere.
You now have captured that troublesome carrot eater guy. I'll open up my door so you can put that rogue inside my drawer.
There's the living rocks that help you get into Darkness's house, the aforementioned room with the dancing furniture, the sarcastic wishing well.
Your lunch goes in you, does it not? Perhaps you would like me to call you Lunchbox as well.
Hell, there's that puzzle where you need to make an invisibility potion, but you're given a list of potions to make, which each have hilarious over-the-top animations where it goes completely wrong. There are tons of minor characters, tons of fun animations with the background objects. This game is knowingly over the top and it never lets off the gas, so there's rarely a dull moment. And if you do get tired of it, you can just skip the animations by pressing the escape key. This game is honestly worth playing just to see all of the imagination, and imagination is really the word. Aesthetically, Pajama Sam 1 and the rest of the games for that matter look like they could have been drawn in MS Paint, and most animations are janky 3-frame affairs that usually don't even sync up properly with the voice, but I kinda like it because it fits the scrappy feel to this game. But I don't like the graphical presentation so much. Like I said, this game is dark. I can forgive a lot, but because this game takes place at night, it looks kinda murky and boring. There are times when they go hog wild with the color, but so much of this game is just boring dark color gradients that all blur together without anything really popping out. Sure, it took place at night, but is there any reason the interiors couldn't have had more life? I remember seeing the screens in the gold mine and being like, wow, color, I remember that. But that's probably the worst part of this game, and aesthetically as a whole, it really builds into what I think is the best part of this game, and indeed the trilogy. The Pajama Sam trilogy, I find in every sense of the word, feels like it's right out of a child's imagination. They capture that chaotic nature of a child's mind perfectly, where everything has its own logic that doesn't quite make sense, but it also kinda does, where everything changes at a moment's notice as the child's mind races with creativity that can only be understood by them. This game and the other two are a few of the only games that absolutely nail the feeling of childlike whimsy and imagination. It gives Pajama Sam an instantly pleasant nostalgic feel, and as an adult looking at this game through fresh eyes, there's several things that jump out at me. The biggest of which is that none of this is actually happening. Yeah, this is all taking place in Sam's imagination, so the game is about Sam capturing the personification of darkness itself. The way this game plays out, it feels like an adventure brought out of a small child's mind trying to rationalize his own fear of the dark, and so uses his endless imagination to personify his own fears so that he can face them and defeat them. That's why when he falls into the subterranean world, there are a bunch of items that one might find in a closet because he's just in his closet. So this entire game is about Sam coming out of the... Forget I said anything. And that explains why he just walks out of his closet at the end like nothing happened, because nothing really did happen. This is actually something that makes sense. A young child's mind using its understanding of the world and using that filter to rationalize the world around it and fill in the blanks of the things it doesn't quite understand. I don't remember many of my dreams, but there's one that always sticks in my memories. I was 3 years old and I had this dream where there was a massive earthquake and the roof was falling down, my bed fell through the floor, I was scared. So I ran into my parents' bedroom and they were bouncing on the bed and my mother was screaming and wearing a gold suit of armor for some reason that broke when she fell on the ground. That's all I can remember. It was a really weird, chaotic dream. I was reflecting on this a few years back and I realized something. That was my 3-year-old mind trying to rationalize something that I didn't fully understand. Then when I realized what my mind was trying to rationalize, I wanted to puke. You could probably take a guess what I'm talking about. I'll give you a hint. My room was right next to my parents'. So what Sam is doing is something that kids might do. Try to rationalize the world around them with a juvenile understanding of what the world is. Carl Pilkington also does this quite a bit. So this game and the rest of the trilogy really does feel like they're made by children, not just for them, and they pull that off perfectly with a creativity and energy that makes this enjoyable to anyone, giving it, and indeed them, an organic and instantly nostalgic feeling, and I mean properly nostalgic, not cynically nostalgic. In the end, Sam makes it into Darkness's room, and as it turns out, Darkness is just a misunderstood dude who wants somebody to be his friend, so Sam plays some games with him before being on his way. He doesn't defeat Darkness, he befriends him, and that's how Sam overcomes his fear of the dark, ending with this shot.
I'm frightened.
And that was Pajama Sam No Need to Hide When It's Dark Outside. Not the greatest game in the world, but nonetheless a solid fun time where everyone can get something out of it. 7 out of 10. Next up is Pajama Sam 2, Thunder and Lightning Aren't So Frightening. To start out, I'll say that after some deliberation, I think I've come to the conclusion that this is the best game in the trilogy. I think it's a refinement of everything from the first game, and the ideas were still very fresh and plentiful. So the basic setup this time is very similar to the first game in that it's structured around the concept of a young child rationalizing a fear of something through the filter of his own young mind. In this case, the game is structured around astrophobia, the fear of thunderstorms. Sam is enjoying a bowl of cereal and watching cartoons when a sudden storm scares him out of his socks. So after finding his cape, Sam goes up to the attic.
What the hell is that? Sam, what were they feeding you? Congratulations, miss. You've given birth to a healthy, happy bowling ball.
He goes up to the attic, which ends up being a staircase to the sky itself. He stumbles upon worldwide weather, where he plans to confront the people who control the weather. I like the way this opens up, how you get into gameplay before everything's fully established. In the first game, all the cards were laid out on the table before exiting the first cutscene. This one keeps you guessing until you get into the main thrust of the game, but it doesn't keep you hanging for so long that the mystery becomes frustrating. When you finally get into the control room, they subvert your expectations from the previous game, where they save the twist for the end and reveal the people behind the storm, thunder, and lightning at the very beginning, who are just really chill people doing their jobs, and their job does the world, particularly plants, a good service. It's all a big misunderstanding. But then...
Stroking my chin so you know I'm thinking. Okay, so even though this game is the best in the trilogy in my eyes, I'm gonna go over everything that's wrong here.
So Sam somehow launches himself into the air by stepping on his own cape. So he generated enough force somehow to launch himself, a 40-pound kid, across the room. What? Then he hits the big red button that ruins everything. Question: why is there a button like that in the same room where the rest of the weather controls are? For that matter, why does that button exist at all? What use could it possibly be? Do they need a big red button in the room so they can make a poorly received Sonic spin-off at will? It was only a matter of time before this happened. Third is the fact that the perspective of this scene is all over the place. Based on where the button is in this angle, they're looking the wrong way here. They're facing the door that Sam came in, and the button is behind them. Lastly, and most predominantly, nobody seems to care that Sam just screwed up the weather worldwide. It kinda has a tonal disconnect because everybody's treating Sam like he's the hero come to save the day, when in actuality he's the one that hit the button. He's the one that ruined everything. Instead of saying thank you for helping us save the machine, they should be saying you've done enough, you stupid kid, now get out. Of course, my interpretation has this all taking place within Sam's imagination, so I guess that interpretation counteracts why they were so nice to him. Regardless, that's the worst part of the game, minus one bit I'll get into later. That's the establishing point that the game jumps off from. Now you have to go all over the facility to recover the parts of each machine to get the weather machine working again before Thunder and Lightning's boss, Mother Nature, who's an onion for some reason, fires them. Can I just say, Mother Nature used to scare the crap out of me, especially in the cutscenes where she first shows up and they add a feeling of a ticking clock to the game. I used to not play this game all that much for that reason alone. So even though the establishing cutscene doesn't make much sense, we've now been introduced to what I think is the best part of the game. Thunder and Lightning, who quite literally aren't so frightening. I love their dynamic. Thunder being the calm, cool, and collected figure, and Lightning being a jumpy, anxious figure. They balance each other out, and their dynamic makes for some really great moments.
We're doomed! Quiet!
As a matter of fact, there is something you can do.
Plus, they're in the game a lot, so their personalities are on full display. Their personalities being grounded in one single aspect kinda makes them seem like characters out of the movie Inside Out. Based on what I've heard anyway. I haven't actually seen that movie out of spite because my sister once told me that watching it will help me get over my anger issues. You see, the only time I have anger issues is when people tell me I have anger issues. Thunder and Lightning's contrast makes for some fun interactions, and their bureaucratic nature makes for some hilarity that I don't think I'd have been able to catch when I was younger.
Lightning, we better start on the plausible deniability paperwork right away.
That is such a clever line when you understand what plausible deniability means. It's like saying scheduled chaos theory.
So they're the best characters in the game, and they carry every scene they're in. I kinda wonder about Thunder though. She's this calm, kind, almost maternal figure, but she occasionally blows up, and if you see her employee file, she looks like she's hiding something. I theorized that Thunder's a recovering alcoholic, and Lightning got her the job to help Thunder get her life back on track. She's doing well, but sometimes has a hard time holding it together. It's worth mentioning that Sam is meant to be a reactionary exaggeration of the Everychild, so it's the fun characters around him which he interacts with that are the real highlights, and that's what this game does right, particularly with these two. Now, according to the wiki, Thunder and Lightning are sisters, but I'm not sure if that was ever established in-game, and I've seen these cutscenes many times, so it'd be hard for me to miss it. I'm thinking this was maybe an anecdote in the original game manual, but the trouble there is, I can't seem to find a scan of the manual online. Given their interactions, you could tell me they were a gay couple, and I wouldn't bat an eye. I mean, look at this.
There's plenty to do here as well.
Pajama Sam 2 has all of the things that were great about the first game in spades. Every single moment in this game is filled with hilarious little detailed touches, like the background animations are still there on every screen. Whenever your cursor highlights on a seemingly random object and you click, you get a random fun animation just like before, and these are everywhere and even more frequent than before. They're always entertaining and you never know what to expect, but here they go one step further and start having non-story based optional dialogues and full screen items. Like when you're in the control room while everything is messed up, you can ask about the weather and get a bunch of random weather anecdotes from Lightning.
How's the weather?
It's raining frogs in Frankfurt.
How's the weather?
The tornadoes are sideways in Toronto.
How's the weather?
There are sandstorms in Siberia.
How's the weather?
The snow is falling up in the Ukraine.
And then there's this little gem.
Hey, that one looks sunny.
I know. Unfortunately, that's Seattle.
And there are these seemingly innocuous things like this series of books about cheese, most hilariously making your pet rock fetch with cheese. There's also this machine similar to potion making from the last game, a weather machine where you can create items and get fun animations. There's even an optional filing cabinet you can go into to get info on all of the employees of this place, including
Alphabet 316 says I just scooped your ass.
And the characters around the facility are great. I should mention this series is really into anthropomorphizing random objects, which fits into the theme of an overactive child's imagination. Every non-living object in these games are alive. A stapler, a desk chair, a phone, a wingnut, a snowman, everything you can think of is alive and has something interesting to say. If there's one issue, I think that everyone's a little bit too immediately pleasant to Sam. Like I said before, that's probably just because this is all probably in his imagination. If some kid wandered into my workplace, I'd at least give him the "sorry kid, I gotta get back to work" treatment, but that's just me. I don't like kids. Even Carrot makes a comeback and is on an undercover mission to expose the working conditions of this place, and you have to take him up to the chairman of the board.
I don't give a damn if we're not essential. Yeah, we're staying open, damn it. Such good shit.
I should mention, this game and this game's script is pun-tastic. The previous game had some of this too, but this game goes full force with the puns. Like the collectible item, the Y pipe, keeps asking me questions that start with the word why. which is a joke that may amuse a 6-year-old, but I got tired of it. My favorite one in the game is the fact that there's a security gate called Bill Gate. Ha! Another one I'd miss as a kid, and the chairman and all his board members are where we go into pun overload. So many puns! So many characters, so much energy and personality. You have the horribly anxious stapler who won't let anyone sign out items, the lazy secretary who doesn't give a damn, the vacuum cleaner who's actually a dog. Aww. There's never a dull moment. As for the game itself, it's everything the previous game was, and a little bit more on top of that. Like before, it's a very straightforward point-and-click adventure game where you have to solve a bunch of puzzles to fix the various workings of the weather machines. The wingnut for the sun machine, the velocimometer, god I hate that word, for the wind machine, the automated snowflake inspector for the snow machine, and the Y-pipe for the rain machine. The puzzles in this game, like before, aren't really anything to write home about, as they're pretty straightforward and maybe have a few too many steps. Only objects that are used for something are the items that are spawned, and you usually can't use them until their specific chain of events will allow, but there are moments of genuine cleverness where you have to be really observant of your surroundings. Like there's this clipboard on the wall that ends up being the line to the help desk, so you can call that number to make an appointment with someone. His name is literally George Someone. You do that so you can access the offices in the main building, which is the means to solve like 12 different puzzles. The funny thing is, because there's so much puzzle integration and only required items spawn, even though you may not know what to do, educated assumptions based on things making sense is something this game is filled with. There's an apple core in the garbage, maybe I have to feed it to someone. Wait though, the weather simulator is out of apple seeds. Cool, now I have an apple, and the fact that it spawned at all when before it wouldn't, I know that I have to give someone an apple. Maybe the pet rocks. Nope, maybe the staple remover George Someone? He's the only reoccurring character that hasn't done anything yet. Oh, lucky guess. How about those rocks? I need them to move so I can get an approval form signed for an elastic to fix the rain machine. Hold up, train your pet rocks to fetch with cheese? And there's cheese giblets, I love that name, in the vending machine. Everything makes perfect sense within the crazy logic to those who can catch on to the clues, and they've thoughtfully provided animations to indicate if you're on the right track, but aren't quite there just yet. Like when you throw an earthquake in a can at the vending machine to try and shake the Y-pipe loose, there's an animation to show that that's the solution, but there's extra steps first. It's such a cleverly designed game. -1 bit. The total lowlight of this game is getting change for the vending machine. I looked all over the game and couldn't find any change, so I looked up the solution, which was one of the first options that popped up, so this is a common problem, and the solution was a legitimate jaw-drop moment. You have to go to the weather simulator and make a rainbow which will spawn a pot of gold, and there's your change for the vending machine.
How am I supposed to guess that? That's not logic, that's loony on a sesame seed bun.
Thankfully, unlike the chandelier bit, this is only a problem once, and there are certain playthroughs that don't even have the vending machine at all. As before, there are multiple unique playthroughs you can do, and my favorite unique path is Carrot's bit, where he's infiltrating the place and you have to use him to answer a question with the board of directors that you'd have no way to know to get the key to the executive washroom. These trivia mini-games are always a bit balls despite being ever-present because they're so easy, but they always throw in one curveball. In this case, it was a question I genuinely didn't know, about the Giffen Paradox. It's the phenomenon where raising the price of a low-selling cheap item will increase sales due to the idea that higher prices equate to higher quality. I knew of this phenomenon, but I didn't know what it was called. Kind of an odd thing to know when this is how the same character explains the economy.
The economy is like a wild horse in a pasture, man. It eats, it grows, it produces waste, and the more you try to rein it in, the harder it tries to throw you off, you dig?
According to the menu, there's a total of 6 different playthroughs that you can do, and there's a bit of overlap, but you still get some unique experiences. The mini-games and collectibles are here again. This time, there are multiple puzzles for you to collect, with each playthrough having a different set of puzzle pieces to collect. It establishes even more that these worlds that Sam creates are a stream of consciousness because puzzles are the main collectible, and he was building a puzzle right as the game started. That bit of intrigue aside, the collecting is still as lame and pointless as it was before. Same goes for the mini-games. You have this one at the top of the warehouse, which is a spot the things game. That's just it. You just spot the things. The drain game, which is just click the right place to go there, the game. If you miss cheese and crackers, there's a tic-tac-toe minigame in the cafeteria, and probably the best minigame by default is the Flaker Maker, where you create your own custom snowflakes and can even print them out. This is nice, because it brings back happy memories of doing just this in Christmas past, but that's the best minigame and it's utterly pointless. The rest of these minigames are trash. They're boring and one note, and that note is beep! There is one minigame that's decently fleshed out called the Weatherboard, which is like Sorry with a game of lifestyle spinner that dictates you move whatever piece you want to whatever color the spinner lands on. It's pretty decent. I only played one game because I have things to do, but it's not bad.
I'm sorry, what? Is he saying Sega or... It sounds like he's saying... Oh dear!
Moving on. Visually, Pajama Sam 2 looks like more of the same, but it has improved. I think the animation has gotten a few more frames, and the color palette has really brightened up to include a lot of stark primaries, which really pops, though I have to admit there seems to be a few too many items in this game that look unintentionally... phallic. Moving on, I wanted to talk about Sam himself for a moment. Of course he's meant to be the every kid, but we kinda take for granted that there's all these weird over-the-top worlds and characters, and the protagonist is just some kid. Throughout the series, we get little hints of his real life here and there, like how he's old enough to be in school.
Have you ever been locked in a locker, Sam?
No, but my friend Pete got stuck in one at school one time.
But I wonder how old he is. He's in school, but is still young enough to sleep with the lights on. So I want to say he's between 6 and 8 years old. We know his father is still in the picture, and according to the next game, he has an older brother. But that's basically all we know about him. We spent 3 games in his imaginary world, and yet we know next to nothing about him or his life. And that's a point that intrigues me. In fact, we never even see any other character in the real world other than his mom's shadow. Perhaps there is no separation between the real world and the imaginary world, it's just different levels of Sam's mind. Or perhaps this is a post-apocalyptic world and Sam is surviving off the remnants of society while hallucinating everything including his own mother because he's too damaged to come to terms with the fact that everything he's ever known and loved is dead. Isn't interpretive fiction fun? Anyway, so this game ends with Sam fixing all the machines right as Mother Nature gets into the control room, leading to some great moments.
Mother Nature, you haven't seen my slides from my trip to Cleveland.
I'll try to live with the disappointment.
But ho, everything worked itself out, and everyone lives happily ever after. Sam even gets to control the weather as we cut to the credits with hilarious clips of the weather all over the world being all crazy. The end. Pajama Sam 2 Thunder and Lightning Aren't So Frightening is a great game. It's not substantially better than the rest of the trilogy, but I think the puzzles, the world, the characters, they're all better than ever here, and I think that makes for an overall enjoyable product for anyone to play, assuming you're not afraid of Mother Nature like I was when I was 7 years old. 8 out of 10. And now we move on to the final game in the Pajama Sam trilogy, Pajama Sam 3 You Are What You Eat From Your Head to Your Feet. The third game in the trilogy, and probably the one I played the most when I was a young boy Nebon, but I think this is probably the worst in the trilogy. Not by a substantial margin, but it does show signs that the imagination well was running a bit dry, so the intro this time actually takes up a significant chunk of the game before you can really get going. This one, much like the other two, centers around the idea of a child rationalizing something, in this case healthy eating and a balanced diet. After spoiling his dinner with several boxes of cookies trying to get the special Pajama Man action figure,
I can get the Pajama Man action figure with Titanic elbow thrust.
Listen, baby, that's my gimmick.
And after a moment of regret, his cookies then get up and run away. He chases them into the pantry and they capture Sam and send him into the world of Mop Top, and we get the first, and to my knowledge, only instance of the Pajama Sam theme song. We continue on and end up in a party of junk food. Sam! You can talk to anyone and eat all the junk food. It's a neat area with a lot to do. Then you eat a giant piece of cake that's blocking the door. I've been there. And then you announce to everyone that you're leaving the party. I haven't been there. But they get narky when you say you're going to have a balanced dinner and send you to jail without trial. Now listen to the jailer's voice.
Tell it to the fudge. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got to get back to the party. Tra-la-la-la-la.
Does that voice remind you of anyone? The only voice I can distinctly recognize this voice actor for is being Beltino Toad from Star Fox Assault.
I believe it was about 17 years ago. A whole fleet was destroyed by a soul aperoid.
But I know I've heard a voice like this somewhere. If you can pinpoint a similar voice to this, maybe not by the same voice actor, let me know. In jail, you meet Florette, a piece of broccoli who's a peace delegate at a meeting of the food groups, and you break out by knocking a key off the wall and using a candy cane to grab it. Then you escape and run off to the food pyramid. It should be mentioned at this time that you have to go to the food pyramid before you can do anything, and you have to talk to the returning carrot who's trying to keep General Beatfoot from declaring war. So that's the main thrust of the story. You have to get a representative from every one of the main food groups to the pyramid pyramids so that they can get around to peace negotiations, but 4 of the 6 representatives have gone missing, so you have to find them. Then you can start the game part of this game. But no, before you can explore the full world, you have to get this donut out of the tree, which is an example of a non-puzzle, just click the thing. Then you have to find out what this egg named Gulp's favorite sauce is, and then you have to get the sauce from the condiment tree, and finally, you can get to the rest of the game after Gulp eats all the fries. If it seems like I'm just summarizing, well, that's kind of the issue with the game. It's just a series of things happening that barely qualifies as a game for a good chunk. There are so many flags that you have to get past. There's the party, the jail, the pyramid, the donut, and the fries. That's a pretty big portion of the game where you have mandatory story before you can get into the game, and even then, the portion of the world that's unlocked at this point is completely inaccessible because on one hand, you have the guards you can't get past unless you get the pumpkin from later in the game, and on the other hand, you have the ski slopes where you have to get the plunger, but you won't know which route you have to take to get the plunger until you get the ski pass, which is later in the game. So really, you can't actually do anything substantial until you get to this point. Compare this to the previous games. The first, you get mugged by trees. That's one bit of story before you get into it, so it's almost nothing. The second game has the puzzle where you have to get into the facility and grab the key card, but that's still not much. But the amount of story you have to get through in Pajama Sam 3 is ridiculous comparatively. I wouldn't mind so much, but you have to do this every time you play the game, and it gets very old. And that's a summary of most of the puzzles actually. While the final step or steps are usually different, this game is structured so that most games have you going through the same motions. You will never not have to grab the ski pass from the plumbers to get the plunger from the slopes to get the wrench to fix the pipes. You will never not have to talk to Gulp to get his preferred condiment to put on fries, then have to go back to the condiment tree, which is in the next area, and go back and dump that sauce on the fries. You will never not have to go to the comedian who bombed on stage to get the pumpkin to disguise yourself as a gourd to see the telescope. So much of this game feels like you're just going through the same motions whenever you play. Pajama Sam 3 also feels much less clever and expansive than the previous games. Most of the puzzles are very self-explanatory and often are solved in the same set of areas. Like once you enter the area with Pierre Le Pen, if it's the balloon scenario, there's nothing stopping you from just grabbing the balloon, hitting the bell with the mallet, then grabbing him before doing anything. That's a quarter of the main objective done right there. Furthermore, once you solve these puzzles, they just make their way to the delegate conference on their own. It's not like you also have to deliver them, but I guess they all go to the same place, so that would have been a bit redundant. Another good example is when the beans are on strike. If the foreperson has a giant crate in his office, you have to go through an obnoxious and slightly arcane process to get the instruction manual from the library, which includes getting a library card before bringing it back and building a bean counting machine. Then after playing an hour of baby's first pachinko machine, you finally get the bean delegate number 47.
Bubble butt, bubble, bubble, bubble butt, bubble butt, bubble, bubble, bubble butt.
But if the beans are on strike, all you need to do is bring the bean foreman outside, then switch the signs. There, I finished it in less than a minute. 1/4 of the main objective, people. There were whole areas you could have outright missed or were scenario specific in previous games, but comparatively this world feels much more small with much more used and reused content. I'm all for streamlining, but they streamlined way too much and almost made this game too simple even for its target audience. Even the backgrounds seem less interactable and less interesting. I'm not saying Pajama Sam 3 is bad, it's still imaginative and fun, it still has wacky characters and creative set pieces, it even still carries the central themes and ideas from the first 2 games with a degree of cleverness that you can only get from this series. But it feels lesser in almost every way to the point that I think this is easily the weakest in the entire trilogy the more I think about it. It's still good, don't get me wrong, but it feels like it's fighting against itself and needs a ground-up rework to be fixed. The gameplay is still the same as it was before, a basic point-and-click graphic adventure game where you have to solve puzzles. In this case, you have to find the remainder of the 6 peace delegates that represent the food groups, and there are some clever puzzles here. Chuck Cheddar being stuck in the cloud is probably the highlight of the game. He needs just the right amount of sand to float to the ground, so you need to disguise yourself to get into the telescope and see how much sand he needs. Then grab the bag from Zach Zook, fill it with enough sand at the beach to put Chuck at just the right amount of weight, and presto, drop it in and the cheese has nested. That's the best part because it requires some problem solving and actual thought when so much of this game is just a sequence of obvious or linear events, most of which are just repeated from playthrough to playthrough and if not are signposted. You have to answer 3 questions about cheese. One of them requires you to know which fork is for cheese, and there's a shack that specializes in etiquette, there's a voucher on a random wall for a free etiquette lesson, bing bang boom. It's part of a 3-part puzzle that reuses the whole Chuck Cheddar bit of looking through a telescope, this time to see what type of cheese the moon is made out of. That's fun, but I'm starting to get a sense of diminishing returns here. Was there no other way to see what type of cheese the moon was made out of? Some of this game was so boring and repetitive, I decided to try out the speed modes that this game has. I saw the option in the first 2 games, but I thought, what the hell, and it makes this game a hoot and a half. It speeds up all animations that don't involve talking, so it can make this game lurchy in an insanely entertaining way.
Right? But I'm not taking any chances. Oh boy, a box top!
It should be mentioned that rather than binary slots to choose playthroughs from, the different playthroughs in 3 can be chosen individually based on scenarios that each character has, so you can fully customize what game you want. The minigames here are the bean sorting machine, which is like ultra simple pachinko, and you can boil it down to a single switch, and you have to sort 47 beans, so that's like 5 minutes wasted right there unless you're using the speed mode, but then it's just a touch too fast. There's the powdered sugar slopes. There are no hazards, and all you need to do is make sure you're aligned on the correct route to grab the plunger, so it's just a glorified way to drag your mouse across the screen. There's nothing to it. This shelf scramble game almost had something to it. It's like Donkey Kong with Burger Time style platforming. Issue is, there's only one real hazard. This guy named Grouchy Garlic, and most of the rest of this game is just spent waiting for platforms. It was so close, but they blew it. And you have a small platforming minigame to get Granny Smith. All I have to say is, at least it's quick. Oh yeah, there's also this photo booth which you use to get a library card, but there's not much to it. I tried to make Sam look as scary as possible, but this game doesn't have enough options. I've heard it said that arcade sections in graphic adventure games were always the universal lowlight of the genre, and while there's nothing here that's outright unplayable, it's just all kinda dull. And unlike previous games where most minigames were at least optional, these are all mandatory at some point. And speaking of boring and pointless but ultimately inoffensive, this time the collection is based around box tops. Same thing as before, with the only difference being the animation you get for collecting all 20. It's as good a reward as any, given the fact that there's been no reward up till now, but the fact of the matter is these collectibles have been in 3 games and none of them have been any good, and the same goes for the minigames, and the main thrust of gameplay is the weakest as well in this game. So that should explain why Pajama Sam 3 is the weakest in the trilogy, but hold on there. The story, the characters, and the world, once they get going, are still really good. First of all, I like that given the fact the entire game is centered around one's own eating habits, the island of Mop Top is meant to look like Sam. The arguments of the food groups all taking place within the food pyramid are meant to mirror the struggle of a balanced diet, or maybe I'm just talking out of my bum. But regardless, the different parts of the world each represent a different part of the body. You have the obvious ones like foothills, the giant eye telescope, or the connecting junction that is your main road to everywhere in the game, that being the giant heart with 4 valves. There's a lot of clever imagery here, and it all fits into the game's theme. Every single character is some type of food, and that's something they have a lot of fun with. The names for a start continue to be pun-tastic, like the fruit representative is a Granny Smith named Granny Smith, with a Y. But why? Then you have the French baguette named Pierre Le Pain, which I think is supposed to be Pierre Le Pain, pain being French for bread. Neither of these characters are that interesting. One's a stereotype of a granny, and one's a stereotype of a Frenchman, which I've seen way too many of. I think my favorite character in the game, however, is Chuck Cheddar, the dairy representative. He's such a goofy, over-the-top Indiana Jones style character. This is how he introduces himself.
I'm Chuck Cheddar, Cheese of Adventure! I'm on my way to the conference.
He's the only character where the tongue is fully in cheek. I think they made the mistake of making some of these characters too normal. Bean 47, for example, is just an interchangeable bean with no defining traits other than that terrific, round, plump face. Or Florette, who's just a regular person with no defining characteristics and no defining moments either, other than that time she kissed Sam on the cheek. FBI, open up! I would have preferred Selma and Selena, the Celery Sisters, who have this fun ongoing rivalry over whether dancing or etiquette is more important, or the ironically crying onion who's the librarian that gives you the manual to the bean sorting machine. Some other fun characters include the cupcakes and the muffins. That entire subplot is funny, with the jocks refusing to work because there are some hot babes tanning, so you have to use the hose to grow some cauliflower to block the sun, though that does raise a certain question, right? Why is it that most of the food in this game is alive, but there are certain instances like the cake at the party, the junk food at the party, or this cauliflower that aren't alive? What dictates food being alive and not being alive? Anyways, while Chuck Cheddar is my favorite character, second and third goes to the sweet potato guards Peterson Taylor.
It's no gourds allowed.
No, that's not right. It's gourds only.
Gourds only, that's right. And, he's not a gourd, so...
I just love their dunderheaded personalities. It reminds me of the DBZA version of the fake Namekians.
You know what, screw it. Just summon the tentacle monsters.
Oh, alright. Tentacle monsters.
Tell me these two don't pair perfectly.
Why do you have to go and mess this up? Blow our cover.
Okay, I did not do that. Did I do that?
But you must tap, because I would never do anything that stupid.
Another one of the highlights is Celibus the Sage, a cheese enthusiast. You need to help him get the answers that have eluded him for many years before you can blow his horn. Get your mind out of the gutter. All to cause an avalanche. In spite of the straightforward and slightly repetitious nature, it's a fun journey to find the answer to these questions. Coincidentally, this is all to save Chuck Cheddar. Is there any wonder why he's the highlight? Probably the low light of the characters in this game are the characters in the comedy segment. You have Mickey Hollandaise, who bombs on stage, and that's followed up by Tom Rutabaga, the quote, knock knock king. And these are some of his jokes.
Knock knock!
Who's there?
Butter!
Butter who?
Butter, open the door, or I'll knock it down! Yeah, this is my kind of crowd! Knock knock!
Who's there?
Sarah!
Sarah who?
Sarah, doctor in the house! I think I broke my funny bone!
I'm not sure if they're knowingly trying to be funny or being deliberately terrible, but this is cringe humor at best. They recorded so many of these, but not one is good, which I guess makes sense seeing as knock-knock jokes are the dirt under the ground level of comedy. The ticking clock feeling that was established 2/3 of the way through the second game is established right from the start of 3 because the entire game is spent trying to get the delegates together before Beatfoot declares war. Of course, the concept of war on an island that is our main protagonist with a bunch of food is a bit of a hard to interpret metaphor. Is it food poisoning? Is it obesity? Is it the decision to overload on one type of food and nothing else? This is a hard to decipher message, which is just as well because along with a less reactive world than the previous games, there's less individual moments that really stick out that I can point to and say are clever or interesting. I just think this world is more static and boring as a whole. I still enjoy it, but it can't help but feel lesser than the previous 2 games, and that's a shame. As far as graphics go, there's not much to be said. This game isn't quite as colorful as 2, but not quite as dark as 1, and of course 3 is less imaginative visually than either of the first 2. They're all cut from the same cloth visually, and 3 might have slightly better animation, and it does have some truly amazing visuals in places, the heart, the beaches, and so on, but overall, this game is a step back from 2 visually, and this is my first time noticing, but I looked into the skies and found that there were
Jitters everywhere.
Now, I've been saving the soundtrack because the soundtrack is generally the same for all 3 games. The Pajama Sam Trilogy's soundtrack is very, very MIDI. What I mean is that this was during a time when developers were transitioning from traditional stylized MIDI soundtracks into an attempt at making MIDI sound realistic, and so this series attempted to have a higher quality, more realistic soundtrack in an area where sound fonts just weren't there yet. Summary being that the Pajama Sam Trilogy soundtrack is generally low quality, like they're real instruments being submerged in water. There are some good pieces here and there, but overall these soundtracks are just dying for modern renditions because the instrumentation is good for the most part, but the quality is lacking. Thankfully all these games are dialogue heavy enough that the soundtracks are generally drowned out, so if you don't like the soundtracks like me, it's not that big of an issue. And if you do like the soundtracks, I don't know, get your ears cleaned. Finally, the game ends when all the delegates get into the meeting and get into a heated argument, only for Sam to show up and be the voice of reason.
If there's one thing I've learned since I've been here, it's that no food is an island.
What?
And so everyone agrees to peace, for a new world order of a balanced diet. Which once again plays into this being built around a young child rationalizing the idea of having a healthy diet. The end. Along with some funny pictures of the aftermath. Overall, this game still has much of what I loved about the first 2 games, and I still enjoyed my time with it, but it's repetitive, feels less imaginative, is repetitive, and feels like a scaled back game compared to the other 2. I still recommend it if you enjoyed the first 2 games, but it's the first game in the series that isn't something that I could see anyone enjoying, but I do give Pajama Sam 3 this. You Are What You Eat From Your Head to Your Feet is the best subtitle in the series. 6 out of 10. Now that we're done here, what is it that makes this series so revered and so well remembered? Well, I think it all comes down to the fact that Pajama Sam as a trilogy is one of the few series of its type that's accessible to everyone because while the themes and ideas are inherently juvenile, it never feels like it's talking down to you. They feel like they're trying to say something and create something that everyone can get something out of regardless of age, unlike so many other games, movies, and shows cut from the same cloth that feel condescending towards the audience. Like they have to baby talk the audience through the story and explain everything to them. No, Pajama Sam can be educational, can be somewhat challenging, can even have some pretty thoughtful interpretations to be made, all within the trappings of games filled with imagination, cleverness, and endless energy. And that's what makes Pajama Sam such a memorable series.
You know, it is kinda weird to revisit something from my childhood that's explicitly made for children, but honestly, it's almost just as weird to revisit something from my childhood that still holds up fully, for the most part at least. Now, of course there were the activity centers and the minigame compilations, but those aren't really extensions to the series, they're more extensions to the individual games themselves, and aren't really worth spit unless you're buying a compilation of the entire series as a whole. So, until next time... Somebody at the door. Well, you're an unexpected guest.
Holy crap, there was a fourth Pajama Sam game? Not only that, but a fourth game that came out in 2003. In fact, according to the wiki, Pajama Sam 4 was released on the same day as Putt Putt 7, making it tied for the final humongous entertainment game made before shutting down 3 years later. But it probably shouldn't have happened. You see, back in 2000, the co-founders of the company, Shelley Day and Ron Gilbert, were in a bid to try and buy back majority ownership of the company from Infogrames, but the day the deal was meant to be finalized coincidentally happened to be the day of the dot-com collapse, which is too big a topic to get into here, but as a result, they lost their key investors and the deal fell through, resulting in the co-founders and most of the rest of the original team leaving for greener pastures. Then later in 2001, 78 additional staff were laid off, so the end result was that all subsequent games by Humongous Entertainment were made with an almost entirely new, smaller team, and oh doggy, does it show. I didn't even know this game existed until I happened to see that the entire series was on sale on GOG for $5 and saw that there was another game in the second game pack I didn't recognize. So let's hop into Pajama Sam 4, Life is Rough When You Lose Your Stuff. Now first of all, I want to talk about the title. Pajama Sam 4, Life is Rough When You Lose Your Stuff. What is it trying to say? The great thing about the previous subtitles were their ability to convey the primary themes of their respective games and let you know exactly what they were about. No need to hide when it's dark outside, thunder and lightning aren't so frightening, you are what you eat from your head to your feet. They conveyed the key themes and they were all things that kids would have had to deal with in their lives. But now life is rough when you lose your stuff? What is this game trying to say? What is it about? Well, it's about $6. And based on the subtitle alone, you can tell the cleverness has gone away so drastically that Dexter Holland is writing a song about it as we speak. And it feels like this game is gonna suck. Second, getting this game to run has been an exercise in cruelty. GOG is usually really good about making sure the game runs before selling it, but apparently Pajama Sam 4 is the exception. I read an unverified source that said this is due to a now very outdated anti-theft software that came with the game that cripples it unless you have it in your disk drive, and this was never fixed for subsequent releases. I tried a bunch of things before I found a program called Virtual Clone Drive that's apparently supposed to help. And it worked, so now I could bask in the glory of the worst game in this series by a country mile. Let's talk about the good first. This game is animated much smoother than the first 3 games, although with that, the animations are much slower and don't have that much energy. That and the fact that the voices don't even slightly sync up with the animations.
What's wrong? Is it something I could help you with?
I thought that was because I was running a duct tape and string operation getting this game to run, but apparently this is an issue that everybody has. And many of the background animations you could get were toned down or taken out, like the poster that just pops from frame to frame as you click it. As opposed to previous games, alright, the music is better with a crisper, more clear sounding MIDI. This game's collectibles, the trading cards, are probably the best collectible items in the series because they give you some flavor text, but these cards are so frequent that calling them collectibles is almost underselling it. Yeah, no, that's it. The first and most glaring issue in the pile is probably due to budgetary reasons. Gone is Pamela Adlon in favor of someone named Alicia Ferguson, someone who did all of 2 voice roles, and the other one is Backyard Baseball.
I know an autograph is just somebody writing their name, but if I'm gonna meet Pajama Man, I've gotta have just the right thing for him to sign. Ooh, and I know just what that is.
I was actually shocked when I first heard this because, with all due respect, Sam's replacement just isn't very good. She tries to over-enunciate everything, and as a result, she talks very slowly and with a tone that makes Sam sound brain-damaged.
My, but you have big shiny teeth.
Not to mention, the voice actress sounds almost disinterested, like she's not really putting her all into the role.
I got the sucker! Yay!
Does that sound excited or any emotion at all? I almost want to try and find Alicia Ferguson and ask her about this role and how it came about, seeing as it's her lone major role. It makes me realize how much personality Pamela Adlon added to the character just with subtle inflections and tones. That's the first and most shocking point in this game, and from there things only get worse. I should mention that with my duct tape and string method to get this game running, or possibly just because this game is crap, it's playing in a tiny screen on my desktop that I can't maximize without the recording screwing up. So there are things that I can't see which might have been more obvious in full screen. Maybe it's my fault, maybe it's their fault for building a game engine out of horse giblets, maybe it's Maybelline. So what's the story? Well, Pajama Man is coming to a local mall and Sam wants him to sign his mint condition Pajama Man 1. But isn't Pajama Man a fictional character in this universe? Wouldn't Sam just be ruining his comic book with some random mascot signature? Does Sam also get the Mall Santa's autograph? Well, anyway, Sam's door is stuck due to this mess, which triggers a near avalanche in his room when he finally gets in, and his comic book gets sucked into the subterranean world of dirtiness, and Sam runs off to find it. I guess they were trying to convey the theme of cleanliness, because much of the items in this game center around being dirty, but it's not fully committed to. The first game was unmistakably about darkness, the second about the weather, and the third about food, with all the items and characters conveying this, so I guess this one is about stuff? You know, life is rough when you lose your stuff? But the themes and imagery in this game are so broad and poorly conveyed that none of this is obvious. I guess there's a fair amount of imagery to do with dirtiness, like spilled soda swamp or the giant washing machine, but so much of the imagery isn't connected to the primary theme. What does a chessboard, a person knitting, or a fish tank with a deep-sea diver have to do with any of this? Nothing, because the imagery is wishy-washy, ironically, and they probably didn't know what they were doing, and so the main plot of finding your comic book is incidental to the themes and not an extension of it. So the themes feel like they're trying to force meaning into a story that has no meaning. I mean, Sam doesn't learn anything, so from the beginning this is clearly a production where the staff understood the broad strokes of the series but didn't understand the subtleties. So the plot is you have to get your comic book back. The game gives neither you nor Sam any indication of this, but you need to get into the Grubby Corners Mall to find your comic book, but to do this you need a shirt, socks, and shoes. So you need to go all over this game world and find these 3 items by any means necessary. I think one of the bigger issues with this game as far as the context is that there is no context. You're given the vague goal of getting your comic book back, but the how and where is up to you to stumble and bumble into. The first 3 games had very clear stated goals. For example, you knew where Darkness's room was and you knew what you needed to do to get there. It was just a matter of figuring out where everything was. But as far as I know, my ultimate goal, the comic book, could be anywhere, and when I end up finding it, it's in an arbitrary location because it could have literally been anywhere. But man, so much talking about the themes that I haven't even been able to complain about the tone-deaf writing. This game starts out with, out of nowhere, a 3-minute song and dance cutscene to establish that a dirty sock is dirty.
You're all alone. It's strange to see. We guess you must deserve to be.
And the rest of the characters add nothing. They're not there to move the story along, to be funny, to be interesting, or anything. This game has characters because they had to put extra characters in there. At one point stuffing 4 next to each other in the same scene. For no reason. The dialogue just doesn't have the same spark. It feels subdued and sterile comparatively, so none of the characters are really fun and none of them do anything interesting, which makes sense seeing as none of them are even involved in anything going on, and the same goes for these puzzles, like how I need to help this crane operator or trap fireflies in a jar, but only after poking holes in it from the hat of a bishop chess piece or yelling at a mold-obsessed sponge. How is any of this supposed to help me find my missing comic book within the context of the game? It's just doing stuff to make progress with no clear flow or understanding of how it's supposed to help me in the long run. Like, within the context of the game, why is Sam doing any of this? I know I have to collect these items and solve these puzzles, but that's external factors contributing to internal logic. Within the context of the game, Sam would have no reason to know that he'd have to light up the cave with fireflies until he'd already done it. Whereas previously, internal factors, external factors, logic, and goals all aligned perfectly. Pajama Sam 4 just has you doing stuff to make progress with no clear flow or logic. The plot is a child looking for his comic. Everything else is so much filler. The characters, the puzzles, the dialogue, none of these things matter in the same way these things should matter and have mattered in the past 3 games. Though I give the game this, I kinda like the Southern Hick characters and his army of dust bunnies.
Well, you don't raise them so much as you neglect them. The more you ignore them, the more of them there are.
That's weird.
Nice and weird. That's if I can ever catch them.
But that's basically it. Fun fact, after a while I had to have a walkthrough open in the other tab because this game rides a train of logic that was dropped on its head as a child a few dozen times. I had explored everywhere I could go other than this cliff. I knew I needed to use this spoon somehow, but as it turns out, I needed to use the raisins beside the cereal bowl 3 times, which I thought were background objects because the graphics in this game are so cluttered that it's damn near impossible to tell a background object from an interactable object. Could you tell me what's interactable or non-interactable in this scene? No. So at times it's like clicking around the entire screen like a hidden object game to make progress, or how about the random ice cube in Spilled Soda Swamp? You know what that's used for? Well, first of all, you have to use the slingshot to launch yourself all the way across the map, which once again, I thought that was just a background object. And then you have to rub the ice on a wall of gum to loosen the sucker from the wall, and apparently that sucker is used as a lever for the crane because that makes sense. Or here's a puzzle where the solution is leaving and re-entering a room multiple times until you're guessed 30. That is fermented horse hockey. How is anyone supposed to figure that out without a walkthrough, or just dumb luck? Well, good thing I confined myself to using a walkthrough by that point. As for the minigames, apparently there was a chess minigame I never saw. What I did see was this terrible climbing game that you needed to play whenever you went up to the fish tank, which was boring, and the other game is slow and boring Bejeweled. Barely worth talking about. And this game has more flags than the UN. What I mean is things you can only do after something else completely arbitrary happens. Like for example, you can't take the sponge until you interact with a shoehorn, or you can't talk to the bishop until you grab what can only be described as a shepherd's crook from the chessboard. There are a number of arbitrary stopping points in this game where I knew what I needed to do but couldn't do it until I interacted with some random object. Even the graphical user interface is obnoxious. It's insanely particular about where you need to click to select an item. You can 100% be hovering over an item and just end up clicking on the background for no reason. And one minor problem I have is in situations where an item is freed, you don't automatically pick it up. You go back to your starting position and have to wait through another animation to grab it. I mean, you can skip the cutscenes which has been remapped to enter for some reason, but even then the game will need to load sometimes. You know, I don't exactly have the beefiest computer in the world, but I got a pretty decent one. But when this game from 2003 is giving my rig trouble, something is wrong. The fans were going crazy, and for some reason, loading was an issue. How is it loading like this on a solid state drive? What is this game optimized for? A bag of chips? I think all of the issues comes down to this. It doesn't seem like anyone actually cared. I'm playing a game with a half-baked story, weak characters, weak voice acting, no energy, no puzzle logic, no imagination, no care, no effort. It's just a slap-together mess thrown into stores to capitalize on a franchise that was past its prime for at least 5 years. And I'm sure this game was also working on a minimal budget as well, given the state that Atari and Humongous itself were in. Anything good about the series is gone along with the original developers. I'm not going to pretend that this is the worst game of all time, but given the fact that I'd never heard of it before I'd bought the game pack, my life would be no different if I'd never bought this game or heard of this game at all. And I'm not the only one, as this is the only game of Humongous's catalog that has mostly negative reviews on Steam, and that's fitting. So the game ends when you get into the Grubby Corners Mall and people start mistaking you for Dr. Grime, and then Sam just finds the comic book in a green room, so Sam presumes that Dr. Grime took it. Then you have to make the fire sprinklers go off by using piping hot cocoa, which floods the place, then Sam just runs off before his mother leaves without him. The end. Are you shitting me? That was the ending? What did we learn? What did we achieve? What actually happened in this game? Nothing. It's a game about nothing. So how do we know it's over? If it wasn't for the shit show it was getting this game to run, I might actually be kinder to it, but for jerking me around and generally sucking, 2 out of 10. And that's the definitive end to the series. So now that that's all done, whatever happened to Humongous Entertainment? While reading about it, the company was a complete mess of mergers and acquisitions in the early 2000s. There was a toxic melting pot of GT Interactive, Infogrames, Atari, and Hasbro Interactive. Going into that would probably take more time than we have today, but Humongous Entertainment was caught in the middle of all that. It was part of Atari, then sold directly to Infogrames after Atari started facing financial troubles under the agreement that Humongous would remain open and be able to develop games at least until March 31st, 2006. Humongous was then dissolved as of the next day, April 1st, 2006, with their last notable releases coming nearly 3 years earlier.
It was a sad day to see such a prolific studio just disappear. Just gone. Reduced to dust in a second. But I think the rabbit hole goes a little bit deeper than that.
No info is given on the financial state of the company during that time, but it's reasonable to assume that if it were performing well, it wouldn't have been shut down. My theory over what happened was that the core audience outgrew the company. Back in the mid-90s, Humongous Entertainment were caught in a perfect storm. They were the right company making the right games at the right time. When Generation X was getting old enough to have their own families, but home PCs were still a novel concept that was only just becoming cheap enough for most families to afford them. It was a brand of wholesome entertainment for the children of Generation X, but once those children get to a certain age, you lose your core demographics. Furthermore, entertainment continued to evolve to the point that Humongous's brand of games were no longer viable. Once the children of Generation X born in the early 90s were old enough, the children born later had much different means of entertainment. The brand died because it relied on a finite resource in a medium that was under constant flux. They were no longer needed, and now the brand only exists as a nostalgic beacon for those who remember it. And someday, whatever's popular right now will be in the same position. Seasons change and time goes on. Nothing lasts forever. I played these games when I was 6 or 7. Now, many years and a million miles later, the world I live in versus the world I grew up in is completely different. And someday, the same will be true of the children born when I was 10 years old, 20 years old, or God willing 30 years old once they grow up and become the 20-somethings or 30-somethings of the future. Life changes. The world changes. The only thing that hasn't changed are the memories. Thanks for watching. This video was brought to you in part by my lovely patrons. I thank you for your continued support. If you want to become a patron for TGX, the link is in the description.
Incidentally, if you're watching this video and you're thinking, holy crap TGX, why do you look like such shit? Well, it's because I'm approaching about 30 hours of no sleep. I managed to film an entire series of live action sequences on about 30 hours of no sleep, and I'm about to pass out, so